Welcome into college football overtime. We have somewhere up above us an eclipse in the sky, but right here it's all college football. Abe Gordon, Garrett Chapman with you here for the next couple of minutes, just hanging out, talking some ball because it's the offseason, but that doesn't mean that the college football news has to stop. It feels like it's never ever going to slow down, right, Abe Gordon? Because we have spring games that are coming up this weekend. We're going to be doing that all for the rest of the month, and then we have recruiting and everything else that's going on. We're finally done with that coaching cycle debacle that we had earlier this offseason. But you know what that means. We can talk about some of those hires and finally react, not just to head coaches, but to some of those coordinators. And that's what we're going to do today on College Football Overtime. Before we dive into that and a little bit of other news that may or may not be coming to college football rule change wise, I got to welcome in my co-host, Abe Gordon. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. Look, I'm safely inside. I'm not risking blindness by staring directly at the sun. I am staring at a week away from another transfer portal opening. So we're going to have a lot of stuff building in our next episode. But right now, spring game mania is going on. So I'm going to be paying attention to that over the course of the weekend for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another great point. There are some folks who say that this is going to be one of the craziest portal periods that we have ever seen. Of course, you have the news that dropped and said that the players can transfer multiple times. So you know what that means? Players are going to transfer multiple times and they're going to try their luck and see where else they can go. But that's some content for another time. So we're going to save that one for next week. Once that actually officially opens, I'm sure we're going to start hearing some news trickle in throughout the week. And if there's anything major, we'll jump in with you and we can talk about it. But in the meantime, Abe, I do want to talk about one thing that we talked in the pre-show. It is the idea of the hip drop tackle. The NFL, of course, recently introduced a rule that bans the hip drop tackle in the NFL. Do you think that this is going to make its way into college football?
Yeah, I'm really surprised it hasn't. And in fact, it's gone quite the other way. They're taking the stance of we're not going to ban the hip drop tackle. It just felt like that's something that the NFL would put a little more pressure on college football to get out of the game, because now you're going to have guys who are playing for 3 or 4 years at the collegiate level doing this method of playing defense that they then are now being asked to take out of their game when they hit the NFL level. It feels like, and maybe that will happen a year from now or 2 years from now, but it feels like something the NFL would put pressure on the collegiate game to remove. Maybe it's about how it would be officiated. Maybe it's about review technologies and different aspects that maybe the NFL can get away with that. With so many more teams, so many more conferences, so many more officials and referees, maybe they're not comfortable with that. But boy, it just feels like you're setting up young guys for failure when they come in rookie, second year, and they're still doing what is essentially got them through their collegiate to the point where they were high draft picks and then have to take that out of their game. It just feels like it was something that would follow that natural path all the way down, potentially even to the high school level. So, it's most surprising that they're just taking the stance of, no, we're not removing it, and being pretty public with that commentary.
Yeah, it seems very interesting. Truth be told, back when the NFL first introduced this sort of thing, and back in November, I believe, that's when they first started floating the idea of banning the hip drop tackle. I had no idea what they were talking about. I really had no idea. I had to do a lot of research myself and just to check it out and look at it. And apparently it's a really dangerous play. It's not exactly like a face mask or something like that, something where you have that sharp jerking motion, but every now and then you can really injure somebody. And it does, when you actually put it like that, it makes it a little bit more a little stranger why college football wouldn't adopt something kind of similar, just because you're going to be asking some of the very best players in college football to radically change something that's a part of their game. And for linebackers, and specifically, I would say defensive backs, that's really where it becomes a little bit more prevalent, I guess, with smaller guys who need to use their body weight. And that's how injuries happen. It's how injuries happen. And hopefully we just don't see a lot of that stuff. But again, it remains to be seen if that's going to be coming into the college football ranks. Maybe they're just trying to wait and see what happens.
I think they want to see how it's officiated and more specifically penalized at the NFL level, or automatic first downs, stuff like that. How exactly does that play itself out throughout the course of a game? how impactful is it over the course of the season. I think they just want more of a sample size before making their decision. I think it'll be on the table in future years, but it does surprise me they're not aligned immediately.
Yeah, I think that's really what that's what it comes down to, honestly, in my opinion. It's just they want to see what happens
Yeah.
and give it a minute, and there's no rush to get this sort of thing done. It's not an epidemic in football right now. It's just something to make the game a little bit safer. But if it's that much more difficult to officiate, we've seen the NFL has tried to do these things before, and like they did it with reviewing pass interferences and everything else. And you give it a little sample size, it'll give it a period of time just to see how it goes. And if it works, awesome. If it doesn't work, then you move on. And I think college football just doesn't want to fight that fight yet. They're dealing with a lot of other things that are going on in the sport, like name, image, and likeness, and transfer portal, and everything else that's going on. And I think they need to figure out the things that are sitting in front of them already before they move into things like that. Unless it's just a clear and obvious sort of thing, which that's what they're allowing the sample size to be. And I think that's ultimately probably the best thing for them. But that was just a quick discussion, just because I know you mentioned it in the pre-show, and I wanted to give us a chance to talk about that here in just a moment. But let's move into the other big topic for today. And it's the most interesting coordinator hires in college football. I think there are a bunch of them. Head coaching wise, Jed Fish, Kalen DeBoer. Like there are a lot of guys that thought Bill O'Brien's another one. A lot of very interesting.
He was one of my coordinator hires.
There you go. But there are a lot of people who across college football made some pretty radical changes at the very top. And on top of that, like some of those position coaches and specifically coordinators, they kind of get glazed over a little bit, especially for sitting head coaches, guys who, and I tried to specifically have coaches who were moved on from previous offensive or defensive coordinators, and maybe they brought in somebody new. That's generally kind of the direction that I wanted to go with my selections. And I think that there are a lot of really important coordinator hires that I think could radically change college football. We saw what happened with Ed Orgeron and Joe Brady back with Joe Burrow and everything else. That was an unbelievable coordinator hire that changed college football. And those sort of things, they happen. Todd Monken at Georgia a couple of years ago. Those kinds of things change college football. And we might be looking at a handful of those. So, Abe, let's just do it this way. So I'm going to name one. I'll give my rationale, and then you can react to it. And then you go and you name yours, and I'll do the same. All right?
Go for it.
So I'm going to start with one that was pretty obvious. And I think we just need to get it out of the way. Because I think you and I both have this one on our list. It's Chip Kelly at Ohio State. I think any list that does not start and or finish with Chip Kelly is a foolish list, because Ohio State is one of the most interesting jobs in the country this year. Because Chip Kelly, well, let's start out. Ryan Day he's on a warm seat. He's on a bit of a hot seat. If he loses to Michigan this year, it would not surprise me whatsoever if he is ousted. Hasn't delivered a national championship yet. He's gotten them to the big dance a number of times, but he hasn't been. He's been forever a bridesmaid and never a bride. Let's put it that way. And on top of that, he started losing to Michigan. He goes out, he sees the writing on the wall. He understands the situation that he's in right now, and he goes and hires Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly has been a head coach 14 of the last 15 years. That goes from Oregon to Philadelphia to San Francisco and now to UCLA. And now he's going to reunite with his protege. And look, this is a guy who played for him and coached alongside of Chip Kelly over there at New Hampshire, which I didn't know until I started my research for this. I did not realize that. But Chip Kelly has widely been one of the best offensive minds in college football for the last 20 years. Of the last 20 years, he's one of the top offensive minds. Be damned what happened last year. There's a weird situation. You have a freshman quarterback. He understood that there's a little bit of controversy just dealing with everything with his boosters and everything at UCLA. But on top of that, he's had a top 20 rushing attack each of the last 4 years. And now he's walking into a situation with Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins that is, in my opinion, the best backfield tandem in college football. And then Will Howard. I mean, he's also a guy who can run the football, and he can be a threat with his legs if he needs to be. But Chip Kelly, I think that is one of those hires that we're going to turn around and look back at the season and say, wow, how the hell did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's even wilder than that because it really didn't develop until you had the situation with Bill O'Brien, where it really goes back to that. I mean, Chip Kelly was not hired to be the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. Bill O'Brien was, and then he gets an offer elsewhere to be a head coach and takes it. And I think that's a good fit for him there in the Boston area. But then you have the situation, and I'll say this because I agree with almost everything you said. The thing about Chip Kelly, and didn't necessarily hit the heights we would have wanted it to hit in regards to him as a head coach, but the game has not surpassed him from the offensive standpoint. I do think he still can be one of the preeminent offensive minds in college football. And I think certain tasks and duties and requirements of a head coach just weren't his style. But
Yeah.
you talk about the talent he's going to have, the innovation he's had throughout the course of his career. Just incredibly interested to see what they're going to do. And obviously the quarterback's going to play such an important role. That was largely what was the downfall of the Buckeyes a year ago. And so Chip Kelly's going to be hands-on there, going to be hands-on with the design and play calling. And I agree with you that if you had to say number one, hands down, most interesting, not the only guy on the list, but he certainly is atop it. There's no doubt about that. I'm going to bring in another guy that's taken the offensive coordinator job. And in fact, it's a guy that took the job from Chip Kelly's old school. And that's a guy that's making a move in a long-term discussion of why couldn't this guy be a head coach in the NFL. And that's Eric Bieniemy. And a lot of people may have missed the news when it happened. And that's why I wanted to have this discussion. We're talking about the coordinators that are going to shape the 2024-2025 college football season. I think Eric Bieniemy is certainly one of them. It's going to be incredibly interesting to see a number of things, how his style parlays itself into the college game. Is there heat behind him? You know, if he proves he can do it at the collegiate level, will he get heat to be a college head coach? Could he get heat going from collegiate offensive coordinator, maybe back into the NFL as a head coach? I know those some are further down the line storylines, but Eric Bieniemy is a name that is kind of synonymous with successful offenses. And that kind of fell apart this past year when he went to Washington. Quarterback was an issue there, but we also saw the downfall a little bit of Kansas City without Eric Bieniemy. And part of that, obviously, it cleaned itself up in the playoffs, because why wouldn't it? But it's going to be very interesting to see Eric Bieniemy, who's now like completely, entirely out from the Andy Reid shadow. And everything he does from here on out is going to be entirely about him and what he can bring to an offense, to a team, to a locker room. I'm incredibly interested in what Eric Bieniemy can do as UCLA makes its way into the Big Ten.
Yeah. No, I actually have him on my list as well. I mean, he was sitting a little bit further down. I figured he was going to be one of your dudes. It struck me as one of those ones that Abe Gordon would like, and for good reason. I mean, he's a hell of a coach, and like, this is a guy who has college football offensive coordinator experience. He did this at Colorado, 2011, 2012 or something like that, right before he made the leap to the NFL, where, of course, we've seen the success that he's had with the Kansas City Chiefs. I love the hire. I think it's very interesting. You've got a first-time head coach, Deshaun Foster, who, look, he needs guys who he can just sort of put the ball in their court and let them go, right? And UCLA is just in a really interesting spot in the 2024. I think that kind of blends itself into a guy who I'm about to talk about, but they're moving into the Big Ten. They are going to have to adjust the way that they play football, I think, just a little bit. I think it's going to be a very difficult transition for UCLA. I think they're a good team, not a great team, and they might struggle next year. But Eric Bieniemy has been tasked with turning around a program that is it was disappointing in 2024 or 2023 offensively, ironically, with the guy that we just talked about, Chip Kelly, who is considered by most to be an offensive mastermind. And Eric Bieniemy, I think, has a chance to do something, or at least put himself on the map, because if he can turn himself around in a big media market like Los Angeles, I think that definitely played into the equation. You add in a lot of those extra factors, and he's looking at a head coaching job if he wants it. Just based off of the fact that you're moving into the Big Ten, it's going to be a major topic of conversation, and you're in a big time a big time program that has a lot of notoriety. I mean, UCLA, for all of its struggles, it's going to be a topic of conversation throughout the course of the season. And if Eric Bieniemy can do a good job, he can find his way into a head coaching job here shortly if that's what he desires. But on that note, that actually leads me into a head coach, or excuse me, a defensive coordinator. So on the other side of the football, on the guys for the guys across town, Danton Lynn, the new USC defensive coordinator. I mean, look, we know how dominant the offense is under Lincoln Riley, but they need a bit of a defensive makeover after moving on from Alex Grinch a couple of months ago during the season. And look, defensive recruits are already taking notice, specifically ones right here at the Beach State. Justice Terry and Isaiah Gibson both have committed 4 and 5-star recruits here in the last couple of weeks. I think it was like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. Justice Terry is one who decommitted from Georgia to go recommit over there at USC, which is a shocking move by a lot of people, by most metrics. But that's just the nature of getting a very interesting head coach or defensive coordinator. And look, I think it's an interesting hire just because you know how good the offense is under Lincoln Riley. And I think you finally start to see more of a focus on the defensive side of the football. And I think it makes it even more interesting is the fact that he was the defensive coordinator at UCLA before he moved over to USC, which honestly makes it almost a little bit more fun. And he had a top 15 scoring defense nationally last year. He was 10th in total defense last year. But Lincoln Riley is hoping that he can bring some of that over to the other side of Los Angeles because this unit finished 119th and 106th, respectively, in total defense in the last 2 seasons. And we saw him have a Heisman Trophy quarterback again and still not amount to much of anything. The best that they could do is lose the Cotton Bowl, and that's just not going to be enough to get it done for USC and Lincoln Riley. And so you hand it over to Lynn and see what he can do.
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, USC either should have been competing for a national championship or even won one 2 years ago, except the defense was so atrocious. They couldn't even get through their conference title game in a year in which Caleb Williams won the Heisman. And last year, and then you look at the flip side, you're right, like UCLA, their defense was stout. There's no denying that. They're going to put guys into the NFL this draft as well. First and second round guys coming through. And so you got to get a little bit of that at USC. You definitely got to get to that as you head to the Big Ten. So there's no denying that. There's no denying that because that's just what you're missing. Every once in a while you might pull together an offense like Joe Burrow at LSU where it doesn't matter what you do, but for the most part you got to have some sort of balance.
That was a pretty good defense.
It was, but it
was
largely
a good defense.
They were okay. I mean, they weren't
top 50.
Yeah, right. I would say they weren't elite, but they were good enough to win you a title. And that's what you need. You just got to be good enough to win a title, and you can't do that if you're ranked 100 or worse, which is, like you said, where they've been. So
119th.
Yeah.
And 106th.
And 106. That's So I'm actually going to stick on the defensive side of the ball as well for my next one. And I'm also going to stick into the Big Ten as well. This is a guy, and I know a lot of my list is a bunch of NFL guys moving back into the collegiate game. And this one is another one after 21 years in the NFL. Wink Martindale heading to Michigan to be the defensive coordinator. It's almost odd because he's been with a Harbaugh for over half of his coaching career, whether it was Jack Harbaugh, and then he was with John Harbaugh in Baltimore for a number of years. And then he finally moves to Michigan at the same time that Jim Harbaugh is heading out. But going to be very interested to see Wink Martindale and what he can bring from the NFL vision that he's been at for so long now to a team that has just a gross amount of defensive talent exiting the program this year. And so, first year calling the plays there, maybe a little bit of step back defensively just because of the lack of talent. And not even fair to say lack of talent. It's just been so much departing into the NFL over the past 2 years. So going to be interesting to see, but I think it's easier to get your defense ramped up on a quote down year than maybe it is your offense to get ramped up. I think it's very important for Coach Moore to have Wink Martindale on that side of the ball really get things figured out quickly for them not to fall too far from where they were this past couple of years under Coach Harbaugh. And I think so. He to me is one guy that is just incredibly important because look, they're going to drop off a little bit. The question is how much. I think if you can get that defense ramped up under a very accomplished head coach, very accomplished coordinator, it's going to be interesting to see exactly what they can do in the Big Ten this year, the Michigan Wolverines.
Yeah, and that's one that's I think very important, just because a lot of people like to say that, like, you have great programs who are great for a large number of years, which last 3-4 years, Michigan's been one of those programs. I mean, hell, they just won a national title. They won 3 straight Big Ten titles. But people soon forget that the trip to the bottom is a lot faster than the trip to the top. And if you are a great program, it's very easy to slip off and then stay off. And Sharon Moore, I like Sharon Moore. I like the hire. I think he's a good hire for Michigan. I think he's going to keep some of that continuity, at least as best they can, because you're never going to replace Harbaugh just in general. But Sharon Moore has to get these kinds of hires exactly right. So you bring in a guy with experience, you bring in a guy with a little bit of name recognition, and you see what it can do. Because the number one responsibility of Sharon Moore is don't let this blank go. You got to maintain this level. Not necessarily go win a national title. I don't think anybody expects him to go do that. I don't even think people expect him to go compete for a Big Ten title next year. But they have to remain respectful and competitive in a growing and an increasingly more difficult Big Ten conference. And Sharon Moore's got his work cut out for him. So you go get a good hire like this. If this wasn't the type of job where you can go hire somebody, maybe not even hire from within, maybe not even hire somebody who is like an upstart, maybe somebody who could be a big time guy. You got to go get a guy with experience, a guy who knows how to run a program, a guy who knows how to run at least one side of the football, and that's what he did. And I think he did a good job with that, because this is a critical hire for him, because you have to keep that level as best you can, otherwise it slips. But I'm going to go to one that's very similar to my last one. I'm going to go down to the Southeastern Conference. I'm going to go with Blake Baker, the new LSU defensive coordinator, a guy who it's very similar to what Denton Lynn was over at USC. It's a place where you know how good that offense was last year, but you just didn't have a defense that was respectable enough to hold out games. If you're scoring 40 points a game plus, there's no excuse for you to be damn near 500. Absolutely no excuse. And you win 8 games and you're scoring 40 plus points a game, something's very seriously wrong. Something's very, very seriously wrong. This is a group that ranked 105th last year in total defense. And you go get a Blake Baker, a guy who was a linebackers coach at LSU before he went over to Missouri, ironically to a place where they ranked 105th before he arrived. And he got them down to 25th nationally in scoring defense. He was holding opponents to 20 points per game. And this is a Missouri team that played some of the best offenses in college football. This is a group that played that LSU offense and still managed to keep Missouri in that football game. They played Georgia very tough. They dominated Tennessee. They had a tough schedule last year. They did what they did to Ohio State last year in the bowl game. This was a tough schedule, and he still kept them top 25 in the country in scoring defense. I mean, last 2 years, Missouri's been a good football team, and a lot of that had to do with the coaching ability of Blake Baker. And LSU just needs major improvement on the defensive side. They're second to worst in the SEC for scoring defense and total defense last year, which feels like the utter antithesis of LSU football. I don't expect this to be a long-term fix. That they should be able to get this in there and fix it up pretty quickly. Blake Baker seems like the guy to do the job. And you know what Chip Kelly is. If Chip Kelly is coaching at a high level, which he always seems to do, this is a walking 10-win coach. And I think if he can fix that defensive side, keep that offense churning. Of course, you lose Jaden Daniels to the NFL, and that's going to be a big loss. But you get a Garrett Nussmeier in there. The offense is going to cook. The offense is going to be just fine. But what's that defense going to do? Can they get back to even some of those at Orgeron defenses? Because LSU has faltered a little bit on the defensive side of the ball. This isn't that same type of defense that you saw in the 2010s or even the 2000s. But I think Blake Baker can get this group back to being a top 30 or a top 40 defense without too much trouble. And I think he can definitely get it up into the top 20s if he has a good year, right? And when we see that happen at LSU, we see them win a lot of football games, and we see them win SEC championships and compete for national titles. And that's what Blake Baker was brought in there to do.
Yeah, and I think the first point of order and the most important point of order is figuring out how to maximize Harold Perkins Jr. because that was something
100%.
they did not do a year ago. And we can criticize as much as we can. He's not a guy who you need to have dropping into coverage more than he's getting after the quarterback, and that needs to be plan number one there. So we'll keep an eye on that. But you have one of the most talented individual defensive players in the entire country if you maximize that talent. And so that's got to be the first thing that he's devising a plan for on the defensive side of the ball, because you are right. You're going to take a step back offensively. Can the defense help maybe cover that spread? Because the offense is not going to be as good as it was a year ago. Losing a Heisman, you're losing potentially two first round draft picks at receiver, depending on where Brian goes.
Brian Thomas.
Certainly you got Neighbors is going to go high, but Thomas might be a first rounder as well. So you looking at potentially 3 first rounders off that offense. Can the defense help mind that drop off? And you got to get Perkins going, because he can be the same game wrecker type of player that Dallas Turner was if used properly. And he certainly was not this past season. Let's see. Where do I want to go? I think I'm going to go back to the offensive side of the ball. And I mentioned a lot of these guys are NFL veterans from the coaching angle. And I'm going to a guy that was in the Colorado program for part of last year as an off-field analyst and assistant. He has been elevated to the role of offensive coordinator for Deion Sanders and for Shador, and that is former NFL assistant and head coach Pat Shurmur. And it's interesting for a number of reasons. Obviously, his son Kyle was a highly decorated college quarterback there at Vanderbilt. And so I think he's seen the father-son quarterback relationship from that perspective. I wonder how much that plays a role into Deion and Shador's relationship as well. But this is a guy that knows what it takes to get it done at the NFL level. And you've talked about it a ton of times throughout some of the previous episodes of this podcast, but they have added as much as they can on the offensive side of the ball to protect Shador Sanders. Now it's up to Pat Shurmur to devise an offense that Shador can trust will be protected in, whether that's moving the pocket, whether it's staying in the pocket, whether it's quick routes, whether it's letting plays develop, whatever they need to do to maximize Shador Sanders. Because I think a lot of us had questions like, is this guy legit or is it just Deion's son? And I think despite the struggles of Colorado as a team, I think a lot of us looked at Shador Sanders and said, my goodness, look at this guy throw the ball. Look at his vision. Look at this. Look at that. Look at the athletic. This guy's legit if you can protect him. And so you've got a talent like that moving into a new conference as well. I just think it's going to be very interesting to see if Pat Shurmur can bring out the best in not just Shador, but also maximize Travis Hunter as well, because you know he's going to be going both ways again. You're not just going to be able to run him deep all game long. So find ways to get the ball into his hands when he's in there, and find ways to run an offense when Travis Hunter's not a weapon for you on offense. It's going to be very interesting. But Pat Shurmur partnering with Deion Sanders there, I think is one as well.
Yeah, I think Colorado is the most to gain from a coordinator hire. We saw the defense struggled a bit last year. A bit is probably a bit of an understatement. The offense was able to get a lot done, and look, you got Travis Hunter's coming back at wide receiver. You've got Shador Sanders. You have an offensive line that's getting fixed up. And I think ultimately, if the offense is able to protect Shador Sanders a little bit, you let him back there and let him cook. We saw what kind of athlete he can be. And ultimately, like if they get that hire right, and if Shador Sanders is allowed to explode, we're looking at a potential top 5 pick with Shador Sanders. And because Travis Hunter, we know how talented that man is. We know how good of an athlete he is. He is going to be a bona fide top 5, top 10 pick next year. And if you're able to tap into and unlock that potential of those guys, we're looking at one of the most dynamic pairings in college football, because you're moving into a Big 12 conference that I don't know if you really have a lot of world beaters there next year. I mean, Texas Tech's going to be a good team. You're going to have Texas and Oklahoma are gone, like BYU, UCF, Okay. I mean, TCU's okay. I mean, TCU could be a good team. Kansas, okay. I mean, like, look, I'm not sitting here trying to crap on the Big 12 because it was a very good conference last year. It was a very good conference, but it lacked a true world beater on defense that, and they're all good defenses, but I think Shedeur Sanders should be able to find some success. And I think Shermer is a guy who could potentially bring that out of him. But I'm going to come back down to the SEC. I'm going to go to Arkansas. No, I'm not Coach Cal. I'm just Bobby Petrino. He was the head coach there for 4 years with that crazy ending back in 2012. Of course, folks here in Atlanta are very familiar with Bobby Petrino, and we know why he was brought here to Atlanta. And it was because he had the ability to coach offense at a high level and bring out some electric offense. The same reason that Jimbo Fisher brought him to Texas A&M last year to coach offense. It's the same reason that Sam Pittman is bringing him to Fayetteville to coach offense and potentially save his job. And look, we know how it ended the last time he was in Fayetteville, but I think Sam Pittman understands and Bobby Petrino understands that you're not going to get this many bites at the apple. Like, this is it. This is it. So you got to come in here and you have to perform at a high level. And Bobby Petrino, I don't think he was really necessarily allowed to do a whole heck of a lot over there with Jimbo Fisher. I don't know what the situations, the inner workings were over there at College Station, but just knowing the kind of guy that Jimbo Fisher is reportedly like in those locker rooms, I don't know if Bobby Petrino had a lot of control. I don't know if he had his hands on the controller or not. And I think he's going to have that with Sam Pittman. I think he's going to have a lot more control over what happens on offense. And I think you bring in a quarterback like Taylon Green, a guy who can be electric with his legs, a guy who can run, a guy who can throw and do a lot of big things. He was great at Boise State. And this is a guy who wants to put his name on the map and potentially go play in the league, right? KJ Jefferson's gone. He's down to UCF. He transferred before this deal came through. And look, if he can revive this offense at least to the level where it can get back and be salvageable, it was an offense that ranked in the bottom half of the SEC in just about every single major offensive statistical category. And when you had the weapons like you do, you have Rocket Sanders, you had KJ Jefferson. Of course, they dealt with a lot of injuries, but I think they potentially have a chance to do something special down there if they're able to keep all of those ingredients in place. And maybe Bobby Petrino can whip up some crazy mastermind of an offensive scheme to kind of maximize these guys. But he's coaching for his job. He's coaching for his career, and Sam Pittman's coaching for his job this season. So we'll see what can happen down there in Fayetteville.
Yeah, look, I'm kind of along the lines that it sounds like you are in regards to. I don't think Bobby Petrino had full control there at Texas A&M of that offense, and it's going to be interesting if he has full control, what they look like. Obviously, it's a little shaky ground for Sam Pittman. Never hire the guy that's a very clear and obvious replacement,
Ooh.
but if you're going to save your job, I guess Petrino's about as good as you're going to get in terms of that. So,
Do you think he would be the interim?
yeah,
You think
absolutely.
so?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
I mean,
don't
I
know.
think they're going to do everything they can to not fire Pittman in season. I mean, it'd
Yeah.
have to be incredibly bad to fire him in season. I think they'll find a way to just because they knew where they were at last year, and so bringing him back means I think they'd be comfortable letting it play out all the way through the season. But yeah, I mean, I'd have to look at their whole staff, I guess, but yeah, I think Petrino would probably be the most likely guy to be the interim.
It's not the
So.
craziest schedule to start. I mean, they got some wins on there, but we'll see what they can end up doing with that. I mean, they got a trip to Oklahoma State, which is not going to be easy, but we'll see.
Yeah,
We'll see.
I'm going to throw a just a trio of what I would kind of call disgraced college head coaches, and I don't know if disgraced is the right term, but guys who at one time their path was headed upwards, and then it has turned due to various failures at the collegiate head coaching level.
Yeah.
I was going to say ACC schools, but one of these guys apparently moved to the Big Ten, and I always forget about it, but that's all right. But Arizona offensive coordinator, former Syracuse head coach Dino Babers, UNC defensive coordinator, former Georgia Tech head coach Jeff Collins, and Auburn defensive coordinator, former Maryland head coach DJ Durkin.
Yeah.
Just a couple of guys who ran into it at the head coaching level in college. Didn't have the sustained success that they want. Probably Dino Babers more success than any of the others, but couldn't sustain it there. So just keeping an eye if they can kind of relight themselves in terms of a path upward. So just going to keep an eye on those three.
That's a good one. Those are some good ones. Do you have anyone else that you wanted to drop in?
That's my list, brother.
That's your list,
I
man.
think we were both on the Chip Kelly, Bobby Petrino, but so I wanted to branch it out to a couple others, but that's it.
One final one, Travaris Robinson, real quick. I'll just say that.
I didn't know if he was technically. Yeah, I thought about that one. I didn't know if technically if he co-DC, if he's
co-DC.
Yeah.
But he's in that spot where he's kind of filling in for where Will Muschamp was, who just took an off-field role so he could spend a little bit more time with his family, but still be on the staff and scratch that itch, if you will. And Travaris Robinson, real quick. I know we're just finished up, but he's the kind of guy who screams future head coach. And if you really think about it, a lot of the guys who filled that secondary coach end up going and coaching at another team. I think that was Dan Lanning. And then after that, it was Fran Brown. And now it's Travaris Robinson.
Yeah.
So you see the writing on the wall there. I think Travaris Robinson is a damn good defensive coordinator. He is an even better recruiter. And he'll soon be a head coach. But Travaris Robinson's one who I just wanted to throw out there real quick. But yeah, those are some very interesting coordinator hires. And I think there were a bunch out there. This list is probably going to change by this time next year, or by mid-season, I should say. I think there were a lot of really good coordinator hires who I think that we probably didn't even notice. And then all of a sudden it's going to light up, College football news, it never seems to stop. But next week, we are going to be officially jumping into the transfer portal. We got lots more news. We'll be able to react to some of these spring games that happen, and we are thrilled to do it. So make sure you are liked. Make sure you are subscribed. Make sure you are turned on. You have your notification turned on. So every single time a new College Football Overtime podcast drops, you can check it out and follow along with us. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. We are College Football Overtime. Thank you so much for taking some time to join us this afternoon. See you next time.